All
Yeah.
right, more stuff I want to talk about, Ned, from my Cloud Field Day 7 attendance, and this was SolarWinds application performance monitoring. Now, if you hear SolarWinds, I'm just curious, Ned, what do you first think of if you think of SolarWinds?
I mean, I do think of monitoring, but I don't think of APM. I think
Yeah.
of traditional infrastructure and ops
Yep.
monitoring, and
Hmm.
to a certain degree, some level of control and configuration over the end devices.
Yep.
And I don't have a ton of experience with SolarWinds, but when I did try to use it, the number of different products that were under that umbrella
Yep.
became rapidly very confusing to me. It's you aren't steeped in the ecosystem. You're like the what use the what with the what? I don't okay, sure.
And that is because they've done so many acquisitions over the years, so many acquisitions. And the
Yeah.
product has just grown tremendously and has a lot of features and functionality. They don't always quickly integrate on the back end, but they do really work on it. I mean, usually their acquisition starts with a reskinning where it begins to look and feel like, oh, this is a SolarWinds product. I know what this is. It's dark gray and orange and has the right logos and fonts. And they lay things out in this modular thing in the web so I can drag little windows around and kind of make a dashboard and so on. And then
Hmm.
depending on what you're licensed for, you kind of use it all. And sometimes the data each of the applications generate can be shared with other SolarWinds applications, and sometimes not. It all depends on how long the acquisition has been completed. Um, so let's drill into the application performance monitoring stuff here, especially since this was kind of cloud-centric. Three
Sure.
products in the suite we want to hit. Pingdom, Loggly, and AppOptics. Those three. So two of these are going to be quick because they didn't spend a lot of time on them.
Mm,
But one
okay.
was Pingdom. What do you think Pingdom does? Have you ever run into it before it was acquired?
It sounds like it's what's up gold, basically.
Yeah.
I send a ping.
Yeah.
Are you up? Great. That's it.
And that's what it was back in the day, was just that. It was simply literally a ping tool. Are you up? Yeah, I'm up. And it would alert you. It had a learning engine if things went badly. But now there's a lot of transactional awareness, so you can do more robust kind of checks like, I want you to send this query to this web server. And then if I get a 500 back as a status code, I want you to send an alert. You can do more of those kind of things, and it's got historical
Hmm.
monitoring and all that. So that's there. It's not super fancy or super rich, but there's a lot of core basic functionality that you would use every day within Pingdom. All right, so that's one. Two, Loggly. Loggly was yet another acquisition, and Loggly's log management. And they didn't spend a ton of time showing us Loggly. I mean, it's log management. What do you can search the logs, you can organize the logs, you can have it receive the logs, of course, and you can have it do alerting and so on.
Hmm.
The one big thing that they emphasize, which I think is an important segue into the AppOptics part of the conversation, they showed us trace IDs that were embedded in the Loggly logs, where you could highlight if you're in an environment that needs distributed tracing, you rely on that trace ID to be consistent for a transaction as that transaction flows through your infrastructure.
Hmm.
And they showed in Loggly how you can highlight and do a search on a trace ID, since that trace ID was embedded as metadata in the log entries. And they honestly didn't spend a lot more time in Loggly than that, other than to kind of give you a sense of all the different things that were going on there with these three apps and how they kind of work together. Where they did spend, they being SolarWinds, did spend a bunch of time was with AppOptics. And this was, I would describe it as like the beast mode tool that really caught my attention. We're like, oh, wow, there's a lot going on here. And that is around distributed tracing. So distributed tracing, this is, I think we've talked about it on the show before, but this is the notion that you've got an application with a bunch of microservices. And so there's, I don't know, a stack of different servers, if you will, different layers that a transaction from beginning to end might have to go through before it's complete. So you might hit a web front end, which calls a database on the back end. That's pretty common. And along the way, there's some authentication that goes off to the side, and perhaps there's some reporting that gets triggered, or some streaming telemetry that happens. There's all these things that could happen in the course of a transaction. All right. How do you know, if you're troubleshooting a problem, what went wrong? Because you could have at each layer, like the web front end and the database front end and all the authentication layers and so on, there could be 15, 20, 100 different servers that go on at a time. And the answer is distributed tracing. so that you can follow that transaction all the way through that microservices architecture and break the transaction down each hop along the way. And it's super cool because it's a complex problem. I like complex problems. So this, we were talking at the top of the show about distributed computing. It's like, well, this is as distributed as it gets. And where AppOptics really caught my attention wasn't merely like, oh, it went to this server and then it went to this server and then it went to this server. You know, it was that, but it was deeper than that. So AppOptics can even show you which bits of code were executing during a transaction and how long it took that code to finish that particular call. So it's not as simple as, oh, I got to server 1964 and it parked there for 45 milliseconds before we get an answer back out of it. It'll break down what happened on server 1964 and say, in this script, it was doing this function call, and that was 90% of the transaction time, and break it all out in a graph, which was like, oh, neat. Now, maybe that's common and you're like not excited about this, Ned, but I looked at that. I hadn't seen any distributed tracing tools go that deep before, and so it really got me excited.
Sure. There's a number of tools in the APM marketplace that do some version of this. And oftentimes what you have to do is get the developers to instrument the code to properly integrate with whatever APM solution you're using. And it's not usually really complicated for them to do. It's usually 1 or 2 lines of code they have to add into like the main function of their application or something, and then it takes care of the rest of the tracing and logging. But you do have to do some updating of your code to get that. So if somebody could do it without updating any of the code, that would be amazing. But I mean, especially for compiled code, there's really no way to do that unless you edit the code ahead of time. So that part is, it's not unheard of. The part that becomes really difficult is the awareness of what's going on in a distributed transaction, and the awareness of the layers that are responsible for executing the portions of that transaction. We talked about abstraction models and abstractions on top of abstractions. And if you're trying to get to the root cause of a problem, like what's the bottleneck here? If you're running in a container, which is running on a VM, which is running on a host, and you're running into some sort of processing contention or issues, it's very hard to pin down whether it's the function that a developer wrote. Is it the container that's hitting a constraint? Is it the virtual machine that's hitting a constraint? Is there a noisy neighbor problem? So you not only need that sort of awareness of the application itself, but you also need the awareness of the environment in which it lives.
Well, Ned, let's talk about AppOptics and Kubernetes integration.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, I'm just laughing as you're talking through this because AppOptics is they're right on board with that. They understand that challenge, and Kubernetes integration is very straightforward from their perspective. You're going to set up monitoring by dropping a AppOptics daemon set into your Kubernetes cluster. It fires up, and then you get very quickly as a result dashboards that are monitoring the replica sets in that cluster and all the various pods and their characteristics like CPU utilization and so on. So all of that whole scenario that you just cited, at least if you're running Kubernetes, you can very quickly nail that down. Not to exclude other bits. I don't remember that they didn't say, oh, like, we don't know anything about vSphere. I don't remember that they did or didn't say that particularly. It's just that they did happen to highlight Kubernetes integration. And the demo was pretty cluster-centric from AppOptics, but that was just the demo because I asked Adam, the guy that was doing the presentation, hey, do you need a dashboard per cluster? Because everything in this dashboard he was showing us was like just about this one cluster. And I'm like, but you're going to have more than one cluster. You're going to have lots of clusters. He's like, no. This is just how the demo works. You can set up the dashboard however you like, cross clusters if you want, and that's fine. So anyway, AppOptics really caught my attention. I thought it was quite interesting. They also mentioned, and again, I know we've mentioned this on Day 2 Cloud before, but distributed tracing has a lot of open source and standards-based technology behind it. A lot of people trying to rally around different standards that are out there. And AppOptics is trying to play in that standard or generally accepted practice place as well. They mentioned that. I've forgotten all the different groups that are tied up in distributed tracing right now, but
there's a lot.
But it is an emerging and interesting technology that they're
absolutely
the space that they're in here.